What if I told you that Fortnite wasn't the first battle royale? What if I told you that decades before video games made the concept popular, a real-life battle royale was happening on a secret island in the middle of nowhere? This is the disturbing true story of Druff and the game that nearly destroyed hundreds of lives. Before we dive into this insane story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because the algorithm loves when you do that. And honestly, this story is too crazy not to share with your friends. So let's go back to the 1950s. Picture this. Post-war America is booming. Everyone's buying houses, cars, and televisions. The economy is thriving and billionaires are becoming more powerful than ever. But with great power comes great corruption. And one man took that to a whole new level. His name was Druff. Yes, you heard that right, like the stuff in your hair. But trust me, there was nothing funny about this guy. Druff was one of the most mysterious billionaires of the 1950s. While names like Rockefeller and Getty were all over the newspapers, Druff kept to the shadows. He made his fortune in real estate, oil, and some say weapons manufacturing, though nobody could ever prove that last part. Druff was worth an estimated $500 million in 1950s money. Do you know how much that is today? We're talking billions with a capital B. This guy had more money than he could ever spend, and like many ultra-wealthy people, he got bored. Really bored. He owned mansions in 5 different countries, a fleet of cars, a private jet, and even a yacht that was basically a floating palace. But none of that excited him anymore. He needed something more, something dangerous, something that would make him feel alive. That's when he bought the island. The island was located somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, far away from any shipping routes or flight paths. Some reports say it was near the Marshall Islands. Others claim it was closer to the Philippines. The exact location was kept secret, and for good reason. This island would become the site of the most twisted game ever created. Druff purchased the island through several shell companies, so his name was never directly attached to it. He spent millions developing it, building structures, creating hiding spots, and setting up an elaborate underground bunker where he could watch everything unfold. Starting in 1952, every few months like clockwork, Druff would host what he called the event. But the contestants didn't know it by that name. They didn't even know what they were signing up for. Here's how it worked. Druff had recruiters all over the world. These weren't just random people. They were professionals, con artists, and manipulators who knew exactly how to find desperate individuals. They would approach people in bars, at racetracks, and gambling dens, anywhere where people who needed money would gather. The pitch was always vague, but enticing. How would you like to make $10 million? All you have to do is win a game. $10 million in the 1950s was an absolutely life-changing amount of money. We're talking about enough money to never work again, to set up your entire family for generations. But here's the sick part. The contestants never knew what the game was until it was too late. They'd be told to show up at a specific airport at a specific time. They'd be given first-class tickets, fancy hotel rooms, and treated like VIPs. This made them trust the process. They thought they were about to participate in some elaborate game show or corporate competition. 100 people from all walks of life would gather. There were factory workers, veterans, gamblers with debts, single mothers trying to support their kids, college students with loans, immigrants chasing the American dream. All of them desperate, all of them hopeful, all of them about to experience the worst day of their lives. They'd be loaded onto a massive airplane, a modified military transport that Druff had purchased and customized. The inside was stripped down, no seats, just space. Once everyone was aboard and the doors closed, that's when they'd receive their instructions. A voice would come over the intercom. Druff's voice, though it was distorted to hide his identity. He'd explain the rules. Welcome to the game. Below you is an island. You will jump from this plane and land on that island. The last person standing wins $10 million. The game ends when only one remains, or when someone finds the secret exit. Good luck. Can you imagine the panic? Can you imagine the confusion and terror? People would be screaming, trying to rush the cockpit, begging to be let out. But there was no escape. The plane would reach altitude, the cargo doors would open, and armed guards would appear giving everyone a choice: jump voluntarily or be thrown out. And just like that, 100 people would be scattered across an island, fighting for survival and a prize that most of them would never claim. The island itself was about 5 square miles of dense jungle, rocky cliffs, and beaches. Druff had spent years preparing it for these events. There were hidden supply caches scattered around, some with food and water, others with weapons or tools. The island also had several structures, a large greenhouse that was visible from almost anywhere on the island, a few abandoned shacks, caves, and of course, the underground bunker that nobody knew about. When contestants landed, usually by parachute, though some injuries from rough landings were common, they had to immediately assess their situation. Some people would try to form alliances right away. Others would go lone wolf and hide in the jungle. A few would just break down completely, unable to process what was happening to them. The game had no official time limit, but Druff found that most events would resolve themselves within 3 to 5 days. That's how long it took for the chaos, hunger, paranoia, and exhaustion to whittle down 100 people to just one. Now you might be wondering, did people actually hurt each other? The answer is complicated and disturbing. Druff never explicitly told contestants they had to eliminate each other violently. The rules just said, last person standing. But when you put 100 desperate people on an island with limited resources and tell them only one can win, human nature takes over. Some contestants would hide the entire time, hoping everyone else would eliminate each other. Some would form large groups for protection, but those groups would inevitably splinter as resources ran low and paranoia set in. Arguments would break out, fights would escalate, and yes, people would die. Druff watched it all from his bunker. He had cameras hidden throughout the island, disguised as rocks, trees, and birds' nests. He'd sit in his underground command center with his monitor showing dozens of camera feeds, watching people struggle, watching alliances form and break, watching the human psyche crumble under pressure. For him, this wasn't just entertainment. It was a study. He kept detailed notes on human behavior, on who would become leaders, who would become followers, who would snap first. He was playing God, and he was loving every second of it. Between 1952 and 1958, Druff hosted 34 of these events. That's 3,400 people who went through this nightmare. Some winners took the money and disappeared, too traumatized to ever speak about what happened. Others were found years later in psychiatric hospitals, unable to cope with what they had done or witnessed. A few winners mysteriously died shortly after the event, leading to speculation that Druff had them killed to keep them quiet. But it all changed on June 1, 1958, during the 35th Battle Royale. The 35th event started like all the others. 100 people were loaded onto the plane, given the terrifying instructions, and dropped onto the island. The usual chaos ensued, people screaming, running, forming groups, searching for supplies. But this time, something was different. Among the 100 contestants were several people who had heard whispers about previous events. See, by 1958, rumors had started to spread. Family members of missing contestants had started asking questions. A few winners had broken their silence and told their stories to people they trusted. Journalists had started investigating disappearances linked to mysterious recruitment pitches. Some of the contestants in the 35th event had done their homework before showing up. They'd heard the rumors. They suspected what might happen, but they came anyway because they were that desperate for the money, or because they wanted to expose what was happening. One of these contestants was a man named Marcus Reed. Marcus was a former military intelligence officer who had fallen on hard times after the war. He'd been dishonorably discharged for insubordination and had been struggling to find work. When he was recruited for the game, he did what he did best. He investigated. Marcus had asked around and heard stories about a billionaire running death games on a private island. He'd heard the name Druff mentioned more than once. So when Marcus jumped from that plane, he had a mission beyond just survival. He wanted to find whoever was running this operation and bring them to justice. Marcus landed in a relatively safe area of the island, near the beach.
Within the first hour, he started approaching other contestants, not to threaten them or compete with them, but to talk. He'd ask them, "Do you know who's running this? Do you know why we're here?" Most people thought he was crazy and ran off, but a few listened. A few shared his anger at being manipulated and put in this situation. Slowly, over the course of the first day, Marcus formed a group of about 15 people who were more interested in fighting back against their captors than fighting each other. This had never happened before in the 34 previous events. Usually, distrust and desperation kept everyone divided. But Marcus was charismatic and strategic. He convinced his group that their best chance of survival wasn't following the rules of the game, but breaking them entirely. The group set up camp near the center of the island, close to the large greenhouse that dominated the landscape. Marcus figured that if someone was watching them, they had to be watching from somewhere on the island, and the most logical place was the most prominent structure. Meanwhile, Druff watched all of this from his bunker with growing concern. He'd never seen contestants organized like this before. He'd never seen them reject the premise of the game so completely. His normal strategy would be to wait it out and let human nature take its course, but this time felt different. On the second day, Marcus and his group made their move. They approached the greenhouse carefully, expecting traps or guards. The greenhouse was a massive structure made of glass and steel, filled with tropical plants and fruit trees. Druff had built it as both a resource point for contestants and a landmark. The group searched the greenhouse methodically. They found food, water, and some basic supplies, but nothing that indicated who was behind all of this. They were about to give up when one member of the group, a young woman named Sarah Chen, who worked as an engineer, noticed something odd. The floor in one section of the greenhouse looked different. It was the same material, the same tile pattern, but it sounded hollow when she knocked on it. Sarah called Marcus over, and together they examined the area more carefully. They found subtle hinges hidden in the grout between tiles. This wasn't just a floor, it was a door, a trap door leading somewhere below the greenhouse. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. This was it. This had to be where the puppet master was hiding. But they had a problem. The trap door was locked from below, and they couldn't figure out how to open it from above. They tried prying it, smashing it, everything they could think of, but it wouldn't budge. That's when another member of the group, a former burglar who'd been recruited while drowning his sorrows in a Chicago bar, suggested they look for another entrance. He said, "If there's a bunker down there, it needs air vents, it needs emergency exits. No way there's just one way in and out." The group split up and searched the area around the greenhouse. After an hour of searching, they found it. A ventilation shaft, hidden behind dense vegetation about 50 yards from the greenhouse. The shaft was covered with a grate, but unlike the trap door, this grate was accessible from the outside. Tommy used a rock to break the lock on the grate, and they pulled it open to reveal a narrow shaft leading down into darkness. Marcus volunteered to go first, and 3 others, including Sarah and Tommy, volunteered to follow. The shaft was tight and dark, and they had to climb down carefully using the metal ladder built into the wall. They descended what felt like 3 stories underground until they reached the bottom and found themselves in a narrow, concrete corridor lit by dim bulbs. They followed the corridor and quickly realized they were in some kind of underground facility. The walls were lined with pipes and electrical conduits. They passed several locked doors until they reached one that was slightly ajar. Marcus pushed it open slowly, and what they saw inside made their blood run cold. The room was a high-tech command center unlike anything they'd ever seen. The walls were covered with monitor screens showing dozens of camera feeds from all over the island. They could see other contestants wandering through the jungle, sleeping in caves, sitting by the beach. Every inch of the island was being watched. In the center of the room was a large desk, covered with papers, notebooks, and what looked like technical manuals for the camera system. And sitting at that desk, frozen in shock at being discovered, was a man in an expensive suit. Druff. For a moment, nobody moved. Druff stared at Marcus and his group. Marcus stared back at the billionaire he'd heard so much about. Then Druff did something unexpected. He smiled. "Well," Druff said calmly, standing up from his desk, "this is a first. In 34 events, nobody's ever found me. Congratulations." Marcus felt rage boiling inside him. "You think this is a game? You think ruining people's lives is funny?" Druff shrugged. "It is a game, and you all chose to play. Nobody forced you onto that plane." "You lied to us," Sarah shouted. "You told us we were competing in a game show, not a fight to the death." "I told you that you could win $10 million. Druff replied coldly. "I never lied about that. The money is real. The winner always gets paid. Whether you chose to fight each other or not was entirely up to you. That's the beauty of human nature. You always assume the worst in each other." Tommy stepped forward threateningly. "We should throw you out of your own plane and see how you like it." Druff's expression didn't change. "You could do that, but then you'd never get off this island. The only way off is through communication systems that I control. The only people who know where this island is work for me. Kill me, and you all die here." Marcus realized Druff was probably bluffing, but he couldn't take that chance. "Fine, then you're going to call whoever you need to call and get us off this island, all of us, every single person you dropped here." Druff laughed. "And then what? You'll turn me in? Do you have any idea how powerful I am? How many judges, politicians, and police chiefs I own? You'll never make charges stick." "Maybe not, but the world will know what you did. The newspapers will run the story. The families of the people you killed will know. Your reputation will be destroyed." For the first time, Druff's confident expression faltered. He cared about his legacy, about his name, about his place in history. The thought of being remembered as a monster clearly bothered him. "Besides," Sarah added, noticing a telephone on the desk, "we don't need your permission." She walked to the desk and picked up the phone. Druff moved to stop her, but Tommy grabbed his arm and held him back. Sarah dialed the operator and calmly explained their situation, giving them the approximate coordinates based on information she had seen on papers on the desk. The operator was confused at first, but agreed to contact the authorities. Within minutes, Sarah had contacted the Coast Guard, the FBI, and a newspaper that she convinced to start investigating immediately. The story was about to break wide open.
Marcus and his group kept Druff detained in the bunker while they waited for help to arrive. They used the communication systems in the bunker to contact the rest of their group above ground and spread the word to all the other contestants on the island that rescue was coming. The reactions were mixed. Some contestants were relieved and grateful. Others were angry that the game was being interrupted before they could win the prize. A few were so mentally broken by the experience that they didn't seem to understand what was happening at all. Over the next several hours, Marcus and his team explored the rest of the bunker. What they found was disturbing beyond belief. Druff had kept meticulous records of all 34 previous events. There were notebooks filled with observations about human behavior under stress. There were files on every single contestant who'd ever participated, including background information about their lives, their debts, their weaknesses. They found recordings of previous events, video footage of people fighting, crying, begging for mercy. Druff had been collecting this footage like some kind of twisted documentary filmmaker. Most disturbing of all, they found a locked safe in a back room. Tommy managed to crack it open, and inside they found stacks of cash, probably millions of dollars, along with legal documents, blackmail material on various public figures,
and a ledger showing that Druff had actually been selling footage of these events to a small group of ultra-wealthy individuals. This wasn't just about Druff's personal entertainment. He'd been running a business, a sick, twisted business where the suffering of desperate people was being monetized and sold to the highest bidder. Marcus felt sick reading through the documents. "This is bigger than we thought," he said to Sarah. "He's not working alone. There are others involved." The first rescue helicopters arrived on the island by sunset. Coast Guard personnel, FBI agents, and military officials swarmed the island. They found 92 surviving contestants from the 35th event. 8 had died during the first 2 days, most from injuries sustained during the landing or from accidents in the jungle. The survivors were given medical attention, food, water, and psychological support. Many were in shock. Some couldn't stop crying. Others sat in silence, unable to process what they'd been through. Dan Druff was taken into custody and transported off the island in handcuffs. As he was being led to the helicopter, he showed no emotion, no remorse, no fear. He simply looked out at the island he'd created with what almost seemed like nostalgia. Marcus watched him go and felt a hollow sense of victory. They'd stopped Druff, yes, but they couldn't undo what had happened. They couldn't bring back the people who died. They couldn't erase the trauma that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. The story exploded in the media. Within days, it was the biggest news story in the world. Newspapers ran front-page headlines: "Billionaire's Island of Death," "The Real-Life Hunger Games," "Dan Druff's Chamber of Horrors." Journalists from around the globe descended on the story. They interviewed survivors, investigated Druff's business dealings, and uncovered even more disturbing details about the operation. It turned out that Druff had been running these events for 6 years, and in that time, an estimated 300 people had died on the island. Some from injuries, some from dehydration or starvation, some from violence between contestants. The exact number would never be known because Druff's record-keeping, while detailed, wasn't complete. The legal proceedings against Druff were swift, with the overwhelming evidence found in the bunker, including video footage and detailed records. There was no way for him to escape justice. His expensive lawyers tried to argue that the contestants had participated voluntarily, but that defense fell apart when investigators revealed the deceptive recruitment practices. Dan Druff was charged with hundreds of crimes: kidnapping, reckless endangerment, manslaughter, running an illegal gambling operation, and dozens of others. The trial lasted 3 months and was broadcast live on television, captivating the nation. Survivors testified about their experiences. Families of victims shared their pain. Marcus Reed became something of a celebrity, hailed as a hero for organizing the rebellion that brought Druff down. In the end, Dan Druff was convicted on nearly every charge. The judge sentenced him to multiple life sentences with no possibility of parole. At age 53, Dan Druff would spend the rest of his life behind bars. But the story didn't end there. The investigation into Druff's operation revealed that he hadn't been working entirely alone. The ledger found in his safe led investigators to 17 other wealthy individuals who had been purchasing footage of the events. These people, business moguls, foreign dignitaries, and even a few Hollywood executives, were arrested and charged as accessories. The scandal rocked high society. Several prominent families saw their names dragged through the mud. Some of the accused fled the country to avoid prosecution. Others took plea deals and testified against each other. The island itself was seized by the government and eventually turned into a memorial for the victims. A monument was erected in the center, where the greenhouse once stood, listing the names of all known victims of Druff's games. For the 92 survivors of the 35th event, life after the island was complicated. They'd been through a shared trauma that most people couldn't understand. Many struggled with PTSD, nightmares, and survivor's guilt. Marcus Reed used his newfound fame to advocate for the survivors. He helped establish a foundation that provided psychological support and financial assistance to anyone who'd been involved in Druff's events. The foundation also worked to track down survivors from previous events who'd been living in silence. Over the following years, dozens of former contestants came forward. Some had won the prize money and were living comfortable lives, but were haunted by what they had done to earn it. Others had escaped the island without winning the prize and had been living in fear that Druff or his associates would come after them. Sarah Chen returned to her engineering career, but became an outspoken advocate for corporate ethics and accountability. She gave lectures at universities about the dangers of unchecked wealth and power. Tommy, the former burglar, turned his life around completely. He used the story of his experience to help at-risk youth, showing them that no matter how desperate things seemed, there were always better options than crime. Many other survivors found ways to channel their trauma into positive action. They became therapists, social workers, activists, and educators. They made sure that their experience, as horrible as it was, could serve as a warning to future generations. But not everyone recovered. Some survivors took their own lives in the years following the rescue. Others became addicted to drugs or alcohol, unable to cope with the memories. A few committed crimes themselves, their psyches permanently damaged by what they had experienced. The psychological impact of Druff's games became a subject of academic study. Universities published papers on extreme trauma, on the ethics of survival situations, on how ordinary people could be pushed to extraordinary cruelty. The events on the island became a dark case study in human nature.
Dan Druff died in prison in 1983, at the age of 78. He never showed remorse for his actions. In the few interviews he gave from prison, he maintained that he'd been conducting a legitimate social experiment and that the contestants had always had the option to simply not participate in violence. His death was barely reported in the news. By that time, the world had moved on to other scandals and tragedies. But for those who'd been affected by his actions, his death brought a sense of closure. The island remained a memorial, visited by families and survivors who wanted to pay their respects or confront their past. The bunker was sealed off, but the rest of the island was maintained as a nature preserve. In the decades since, the story of Dan Druff and his deadly game has been referenced countless times in popular culture. It inspired movies, books, and yes, eventually video games. The concept of a battle royale where only one person can win became a staple in fiction. But there's an important distinction to make. In fiction, it's entertainment. In reality, it was horror. The survivors never let people forget that. Whenever a new battle royale movie or game would come out, survivors would give interviews, reminding the public that this wasn't just a fun concept, it was based on real suffering. They wanted to make sure that Druff's victims were remembered not as characters in a story, but as real people with real families who'd suffered real loss. Marcus Reed spent the rest of his life working with the foundation. He married another survivor, and together they raised 3 children, making sure to teach them about courage, justice, and the importance of standing up against injustice. Before he died in 2015, Marcus gave one final interview. He was asked what lesson people should take from the story of the island. His answer was simple, but powerful. Never let desperation make you someone else's entertainment. Never let anyone convince you that your suffering is just a game. And if you see someone being exploited, being hurt, being used, don't look away. Do what we did on that island. Fight back. Even today, decades after the events, there are unanswered questions about Dan Druff and his operation. For one, nobody ever found out exactly how many events he'd actually run. His records indicated 34 events before the 35th, but some investigators believe there may have been test runs or smaller events that were never documented. There's also the question of the other wealthy buyers who were viewing the footage. While 17 were arrested and convicted, the ledger suggested there might have been more. Some names in the ledger were coded or incomplete.
Did these people destroy evidence? Are they still out there? And what about the recruiters who found and manipulated the contestants? Most of them disappeared as soon as the story broke. A few were tracked down and arrested, but many got away. Some people believe they continued their work for other wealthy individuals, recruiting people for different kinds of illegal activities. Perhaps the most haunting question is this: how many other Dan Druffs are out there? How many other ultra-wealthy individuals are running twisted experiments or games that we don't know about? Druff was only caught because Marcus and his group took action. How many others have operated in secret and never been exposed? These questions have fueled conspiracy theories and speculation for decades. Some people believe that Druff was part of a larger network of elites who engage in these activities. Others think he was a lone psychopath who happened to have enough money to act on his darkest impulses. The truth, as it often does, probably lies somewhere in between. The story of Dan Druff and his island is a reminder of what can happen when wealth, power, and moral bankruptcy combine. It's a story about how easily people can be manipulated when they're desperate. It's a story about how important it is to question authority and fight back against injustice. But it's also a story about human resilience. Despite everything they went through, many survivors found ways to heal, to help others, and to make meaning from their trauma. They refused to let Druff's twisted vision define them. The island still stands in the Pacific Ocean, now overgrown with vegetation, the structure slowly being reclaimed by nature. The monument in the center is covered with flowers left by visitors, names etched in stone, lives remembered. A dark chapter of history preserved so it can never happen again. Or can it? In our modern world, we see echoes of Druff's mentality everywhere. Reality TV shows that exploit people's desperation for ratings. Social media platforms that turn human suffering into viral content. Video games that normalize violence and competition. The line between entertainment and exploitation is thinner than we'd like to admit. The survivors of Druff's games would want us to remember this: every person has dignity. Every life has value. And no amount of money or entertainment is worth sacrificing someone's humanity. So the next time you watch a reality show where people are humiliated for prizes, or a news story about someone's tragedy goes viral, or you play a game where the premise is survival at any cost, take a moment to remember the island. Remember the real people who suffered because one man saw human life as nothing more than a game. Remember Dan Druff's victims. And make sure that nothing like this ever happens again. If this story affected you, if it made you think, if it made you angry or sad or determined to make a difference, then share it. Talk about it. Don't let these victims be forgotten. And if you or someone you know is being exploited, manipulated, or put in danger by someone promising easy money or a way out of desperate circumstances, please reach out for help. Don't become the next statistic in someone else's twisted game. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe, hit that like button, and turn on notifications so you never miss another deep dive into the dark corners of history. And remember, the most important stories are the ones that remind us of our humanity. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video.